Hello and welcome to the channel. In this video, we are doing our ninth class overview for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and in this video, we are covering the Ranger class. Now, the Ranger in D&D is typically this outdoorsman and kind of martial character who's in tune with nature and knows their way around the woods and terrain. They're typically thought of as an archer or potentially as a dual-wielding character. And those are kind of the classic archetypes that this class really wants to lean to. So here is our agenda for this video. I'm going to kind of do an overview of the class and talk about what I believe the role of the core class is. Then we'll do some class feature discussion all the way from level 1 to level 20. I've broken that up into 5 level sections to make it easier. Now, importantly, in this video, as in all of my class overviews, I'm not going to be diving deep into what all the different subclasses do. I'll kind of give a broad overview, but I won't talk about how any of their features work, because this is going to be based on just the core Ranger class. Then I'll talk a little bit about multiclassing the Ranger and finally go into a summary and some ratings on the core Ranger class. So let's jump right in. What is the core overview of the Ranger? So the Ranger is a wisdom-based half caster, and they are a known caster, which means they know a limited selection of spells. It is based on their class level, and they can they always have these spells prepared, and they can change them out when they level up. This naturally makes them a little bit less flexible than a prepared caster, but typically the advantage of being a known spellcaster is that you usually get a better spell list. In terms of their role in the party, the Ranger at its core is a durable damage dealer. Importantly, they can be dexterity or strength as their primary stats, and they can be a ranged character or a melee character. It's also important to mention that the core Ranger class is a very strong explorer and infiltrator with some expertise abilities that were added in Tasha's, as well as abilities to support the whole party. Also, the Ranger class can also be a little bit naturally multi-attribute dependent, especially if you want to multi-class or go into kind of a strength primary stat distribution, and I'll talk about this more as we get into their feature discussion. So, class features. At level 1, what does the Ranger get? Well, they are a D10 hit dice class, so they share this with the Fighter and the Paladin. And this is the second highest in the game. And this is one of the things that naturally lends to their durability, as Rangers are naturally going to gain quite a bit more hit points than other classes. In terms of their proficiencies, in terms of armor, they're proficient with light armor and medium armor, as well as shields. So typically, as a Ranger, you're probably going to want at least 14 dexterity to get the most out of your best armor to have the highest armor class. It is important to note that if you are Dex primary, medium armor and light armor equal out once you get to a total of 20 dexterity before magic items. In terms of weapons, Rangers are proficient with simple and martial weapons, so pretty much everything by default. They don't get any tool proficiencies. And in terms of their saving throws, they are proficient in strength and dexterity saves. In terms of skills, Rangers are actually a 3-skill class. You get proficiency in 3 of your choice from the following, plus any skills from your background, obviously. So you've got animal handling, athletics, insight, investigation, nature, perception, stealth, and survival as your options. And these are honestly pretty good, and especially for that kind of explorer infiltrator role that the Ranger should have in the party, these are very effective for that, and this is honestly, in my opinion, a pretty good skill list. At first level, so Rangers are interesting in that they're actually one of the classes that's been reworked pretty heavily from Tasha's. So the default Ranger in the player's handbook gets favored enemy and natural explorer, but you can choose to take features out of Tasha's instead. So the Tasha's options are the ones I've bolded. So you can get favored foe instead of favored enemy, and deft explorer instead of natural explorer. Now, on the first one, your favorite enemy, you basically pick a type of monsters, and you get benefits on tracking them and that kind of thing. And you're kind of supposed to work with your DM to kind of determine what your Ranger is good at hunting and what would fit in the world. This can be a good flavor feature, but it doesn't have much mechanical benefit in combat. And then the favored foe option, what this does is when you hit an enemy, you can choose to deal an additional d4 of damage to them. And you can do this the first time you hit them on each of your turns. But you have to concentrate on this feature, and it's not a spell. And you can use this number of times per long rest equal to your proficiency bonus. Now, this is generally better, but oftentimes will also fall out of use because Rangers usually want to be concentrating on a spell. I still think it's better than favorite enemy, but again, it depends on your campaign, and you should talk to your DM about what you want to use. Now, Natural Explorer versus Deft Explorer. So, Natural Explorer lets you pick a favorite type of terrain, and there's all kinds of benefits that you get while you're in one of your favorite terrain types. Um, you know, your party's travel time isn't slowed down. You can gather extra food. You can't be lost and that kind of thing. Again, good in the right setting, but it has to be the right kind of campaign. I really like the Deft Explorer option that you get instead out of Tasha's. What this does is it gives you expertise in one of your skills. It lets you learn some more language edges at this level. And overall, if I was going to be playing a ranger, I would use the Tasha's features instead of the player's handbook ones. But again, you can choose based on your campaign and kind of what your DM is willing to give you. At level 2, this is a big level for rangers. They get their fighting style. So as a half caster martial type character, they get their fighting style at level 2, just like paladins. And your options are archery, which gives you a bonus to your attacks with ranged weapons, one of the best fighting styles in the game. You can also take blind fighting. This gives you blind sense out to a range of 10 feet. You can take defense for +1 armor class. You can take druidic warrior for a couple of druid cantrips that will use your wisdom. You can get dueling for a bonus to attacks with one-handed weapons that you're holding in one hand while your other hand doesn't hold weapons. So this can work with a sword and a shield. You can get thrown weapon fighting, which allows you to draw a thrown weapon as part of the attack, as well as give you a bonus to damage rolls. And finally, you can take 2 weapon fighting to add your ability modifier to the bonus action attack that you can make while you're 2 fighting. Rangers also get their spell casting here, so they get 2 first level spells, first level spell slots. They don't get to learn any cantrips unless you took the Druidic Warrior fighting style. Their focus is you can use a Druidic focus or a component pouch, and you get to know 2 spells at this level. And your casting stat for anything that requires an attack roll or a save is your wisdom. Now, typically the ranger spells, what you've got is mainly damage amplification. So these are things like damage riders. The main thing that is their bread and butter is the Hunter's Mark spell. You've also got a lot of out of combat utility, whether it's interacting with nature or anything like that. You also have some healing abilities with spells like Goodberry or even Cure Wounds is something they have. And you also have a limited selection of smite type spells like Entangling Strike and that kind of thing. All right, at level 3, you get Primal Awareness. Now, what this does, there's 2 different versions of this. There's the Player's Handbook version and the version that they change in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. You can get one, but not the other. The Player's Handbook version, I think, is worse. It lets you sense basically your favorite enemies and some other kind of things if they're within a certain distance of you. But the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything version, basically for each spell level, you get to know a spell off the ranger list without having it count against your known spells, and you can cast it for free once per long rest without spending a spell slot. And the spells that you get are pretty much mostly out of combat utility things that have to do with interacting with nature. The spell that you get here, I believe, is Speak with Animals, which is nice. And Rangers also get their Ranger Conclave or their subclass here. Now, there are a few of these, and I'm just going to go through the kind of a broad overview of what each one is. So you've got the Beastmaster out of the Player's Handbook, although it was revised in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and in my opinion, the Tasha's version is a lot better. But what this does is you basically get a Beast Companion, and this is one of the kind of classic archetypes for the Ranger, is this, this warrior of nature who has a friendly wolf or something like that. You also have the Hunter Ranger out of the player's handbook, and this is a little bit of a more customizable one. Each time they get a class feature, they get to pick from like 3 options or something like that. Can be pretty good. Mechanically is rather simple. And then out of Xanathars, we have the Gloomstalker. This is arguably one of the most powerful Ranger subclasses and gives you a lot for just 3 levels, and it's a pretty popular multi-class option. It's basically based on having this Ranger who stalks their enemies in the darkness and ambushes them and crushes them. You've got the Horizon Walker, which is kind of a Ranger who wanders between planes and that kind of thing. You've got the Monster Slayer, who is basically, as the title suggests, is all about hunting down big monsters. Then from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we got the Fey Wanderer, which is basically, it's kind of like the Horizon Walker, except you kind of wander the Feywild. You've also got the Swarm Keeper, which is kind of about keeping a swarm of animals, it could be bees or bats or anything, and they aid you. And then out of Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, we got the Drake Warden. This one is kind of like the Beastmaster. You get a permanent companion that is a Drake, and eventually, grows up into a big dragon that you can ride, and is overall pretty cool. You also get a third first level spell slot here and get to learn another spell. At level 4, Rangers get their first ability score increase or feat, and they follow the normal feat schedule for all classes, having a total of 5. The only exceptions to that, obviously, are fighters and rogues. And generally speaking, Rangers usually want to get a weapon feat or 2, depending on your martial weapon of choice. And then after that, it's usually bumping your primary stat and then looking to cover defensive holes. At level 5, Rangers get extra attack. And, as a martial character, this is a big deal, and this is obviously very powerful. They are also a third level caster here, and they get their second level spells, and they get to learn another spell. There are a lot of really good second level ranger spells. A lot of the ranger spell list is actually shared with the druid. They kind of have this kind of natural magic. Some of their best second level spells include things like Spike Growth or Pass Without Trace, which you can use to give yourself and your entire party benefits to stealth. They also can do a little bit of summoning. So at this level, you get your first summon spell, which I think is Summon Beast, as an option. Some of the subclasses have spell lists where they get to know an additional spell that doesn't count against your known spells, and these subclasses will get those spells here. And then you get your next Primal Awareness spell at this level. I believe that the second level one is Beast Sense. At level 6, depending on what choices you made, your favorite enemy or your favorite foe will improve. If it's your favorite enemy, you just get to have another creature type, and favorite foe, the damage goes from a D4 to a D6. And then if you have Natural Explorer, you get another kind of favorite terrain. But if you have Deft Explorer, your movement speed increases by 5 feet, and you also gain a climb speed and a swim speed equal to your movement speed. Again, I like the Tosh's features better, but once you've made your choice at level 1, you can't swap it. At level 7, Rangers get another second level spell slot and learn a 5th spell, and they also get a subclass feature here. These typically improve on the core identity of the subclass and are typically pretty darn good. One of the things I like about Rangers and their subclasses as a whole is whenever you get a class feature, it generally feels pretty good, and none of them really feel like wastes to pick up. At level 8, Rangers get their second ability score increase or feat, and they also get the Land Stride feature. What this does is you ignore difficult terrain, doesn't slow you down, and you can also, you walk through non-magical plants and would take damage from them, you ignore that damage. Now, an important thing to point out here is depending on how your DM rules the damage from the Spike Growth spell is, most of them will say it's magical damage, but if they don't, if the damage from Spike Growth is non-magical in your game, that means you can walk through your own Spike Growth without being slowed or taking damage. Something to talk about with your DM if you use that spell. At level 9, Rangers are now get their third level spells. Again, a lot of nice ones, but mainly focusing on the core things that Rangers already do. They do importantly get Conjure Animals here, and they do get access to some druid-like summoning spells, and that is something that you can lean into if that's the flavor of your character. Some of the subclasses get their 3rd level spell here, and you know those spells can be pretty good. And then you get your primal awareness spell out of if you took the Tasha's version, and that primal awareness spell at this level is speak with plants, so you can now talk with plants. At level 10, there's a bunch of things. So if you took favorite enemy, you get a additional type of enemy. If you took favored foe, the damage dice now bumps up to a d8. If you took Natural Explorer, you learn another kind of favorite terrain. But if you took Deft Explorer, you get a pretty interesting thing here. This feature is called Tireless. You can give yourself temporary hit points as an action equal to 1d8 plus your Wisdom modifier. And you can use this number of times per long rest equal to your proficiency bonus. So you can use this, basically, I'd probably use this out of combat to just give yourself an additional hit point buffer. And additionally, whenever you finish a short rest, your exhaustion level, if any, decreases by 1. This is a pretty interesting feature and can be powerful with the right multiclassing or in the right campaign if exhaustion is a big deal in your game. You also get the Hide in Plain Sight feature or the Nature's Veil feature out of Tasha's. Hide in Plain Sight, basically, like, you can be stationary and camouflage yourself. It's kind of good, but not that great. I like Nature's Veil a lot better. What this does is, as a bonus action, you can make yourself invisible until the start of your next turn, and you can use this feature a number of times per long rest equal to your proficiency bonus. So what you can potentially do is use this before you attack. You'll get advantage on all of your attacks, and you'll be invisible, and your enemies won't be able to see you. Very powerful feature and pretty darn cool. At level 11, Rangers get their next subclass feature, as well as another 3rd level spell slot and a 7th spell. These features, again, typically improve on the core identity of your subclass and are typically very good. And again, every time Ranger subclasses get a feature, it's usually really good and will feel very powerful and fun to use on your character. At level 12, Rangers just get their 3rd ability score increase or feat. At level 13, they get their first 4th level spell slot, and some of the subclasses that have spells will give you a 4th level spell here. And then you get your 4th level spell from Primal Awareness if you took the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything version. And this spell is Locate Creature. Again, these spells are useful utility out of combat things that you can cast once per long rest without spending a spell slot. At level 14, you get a final improvement to favorite enemy or favorite foe. You get an additional favorite enemy, or your favorite foe gets its final damage bump up to a d10. And then you get the Vanish feature. This basically lets you hide as a bonus action, and there's a little bit of extra perks. It's okay, but if you have the Nature's Veil, that's probably a better thing to use. At level 15, you get your subclass Capstone. These typically improve on the core ability and concept of your subclass and are typically very good. You also get an additional 4th level spell slot here and get to learn a 9th spell. At level 16, it is your 4th ability score increase or feat. And at level 17, this is when the 5th level spells come in for Rangers, and you get your 5th level subclass spells if your subclass has them, as well as your last Primal Awareness spell. This one is Commune with Nature. At level 18, you get the Feral Senses feature. This basically gives you blind sense out to a range of about 30 feet, and you can detect invisible creatures and that kind of thing. It's okay, and at this level, it could be useful in some situations. At level 19, you get your 5th and final ability score increase or feat. And at level 20, you get the class Capstone, which is called Foe Slayer. Now what this does is once on each of your turns, you can add your Wisdom modifier to an attack or damage roll against one of your favorite enemies, so that it has to be a creature of that type, or a creature marked by your favorite foe feature if you chose that instead of favorite enemy. And you can choose to use this feature before or after the roll, but before any effects of the roll are applied. Now, this feature, I don't think it's very good. I honestly think it's pretty skippable if you wanted to multi-class. The fact you can only use it once is once per turn kind of hurts, and then the fact that you have to you potentially have to use your concentration to mark them with favored foe if you took that feature, or you have to use favored enemy as your first level feature. Again, makes me not really like this. Probably the best use is to use this to bump um, potentially a miss into a hit, or maybe for a little bit of extra damage. But one of the things with Rangers is usually you don't get to have a very high wisdom score. And so this probably isn't going to be that useful most of the time. Like, it's not nothing, but it's not really that great. All right, so with that out of the way, let's talk about multiclassing the Ranger. So the minimum stat requirements to take a level outside of Ranger or take a level into Ranger if it's not your first class are to have 13 Dexterity and 13 Wisdom. And this is our third class that has these dual requirements. And this is one of the reasons why, if you're going to be playing a Ranger, especially if you want a multi-class, they are a bit of a multiple attribute dependent class. One of the interesting things about Ranger is a lot of their best spells don't actually use your Wisdom modifier. So if you're playing a pure class Ranger, you can actually potentially dump your Wisdom and have, especially if you want to go that Strength version. Although some of the subclasses do heavily rely on your Wisdom. But if you want a multi-class, now you need Dexterity and Wisdom, and it can get kind of weird and awkward, especially if you're using the point buy method to determine ability scores. In terms of proficiencies that you gain, you get light armor, medium armor, and shields, which is pretty nice. You also get simple and martial weapons, and you also get proficiency in one skill off of their class list. So you actually get a lot for multiclassing into Ranger. Now, in my opinion, what does Ranger go best with? Well, it goes best with, I think, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, and Rogue. Now, with all of these classes, Cleric and Druid both line up with that should be 13 Dexterity and Wisdom, and not 13 Strength and Charisma. Ignore that. But Cleric and Druid both go well because they line up with that Wisdom requirement, and they are full casters and give you a lot more spell options and ways to support yourself and your party. And both Fighter and Rogue line up with your Dexterity requirement. You can use Fighter to enhance your martial capabilities with an additional fighting styles, an action surge, and even a subclass. And you can use Rogue to potentially enhance your out of combat abilities. Now, it can also work with Monk. Now, I don't think a Ranger wants to multiclass with Monk, but a Monk really likes to multiclass with Ranger, and we talked about that a little bit in our last class overview. Other classes potentially can work, but it's usually not possible or very difficult with point buy stats just because of the 13 Dexterity and Wisdom requirement that Ranger has. Rangers typically like to use small dips if you're going to multiclass as a primary Ranger, but many of Ranger's best features scale well with their level, so you usually want to be mostly a Ranger, although small dip in Cleric or Druid and that kind of thing can be very beneficial. All right, so let's kind of summarize and talk about ratings. Now, offensively, I give the Ranger a 3 out of 5. This is because they've got a solid martial damage output with extra attack. They've got some pretty good spells they can use to amplify their damage, like Hunter's Mark is their bread and butter at early levels, but you've also got things like Zephyr Strike, or some of their like Entangling Strike, or some of the Smite spells that Tasha's give them access to. At higher levels, you've got things like Guardian of Nature, if you really want to go that way, but they also have a lot of summoning spells that they can use. And overall, they are pretty solid, generally going for sustained damage, although, the time it takes to set up a concentration spell, you have to gauge whether that's worth attacking based on how long you think the encounter is going to be. Now, defensively, I give the Ranger a 3 out of 5 here, and this is because they've got the ability to have a pretty decent armor class, thanks to having medium armor and potentially shields. And they've got a decent amount of hit points and some healing. And they also have access to the Absorb Element spell at first level. They can use to potentially block incoming damage. They would be higher if they had ways to boost their armor class higher. And usually Rangers like to be archers, so their armor class isn't going to be that stellar, but they do have a lot of hit points and some resilience and evasive type things that they can do to make themselves last a little longer in combat. All right, control, I give the Ranger a 2 out of 5 here. They do have some control abilities, and some of their spells, like Spike Growth, can be useful in creating difficult terrain and that kind of thing. But overall, because Rangers usually don't get to invest very heavily into their wisdom, any spells that they have that apply a control type effect usually aren't going to have a very high DC and are not that effective. Now, support, this is kind of their ability to help their allies, and I give them a 3 out of 5 here. They're actually pretty decent at this. They have some healing abilities that they can use to be pretty clutch there, and they also have a lot of interesting, powerful out of combat spells they can use to help the entire party in exploration and infiltration and that kind of thing. Now, skills. This is a rating based on how good they are at skill checks, basically, and I give the Ranger a 4 out of 5 here. They get 1 expertise if you're using the Tasha's features. They get to know a lot of skills, but more importantly, they have a whole bunch of spells that are very useful for skill checks, like Pass Without Trace. And the fact that you can apply these to your entire party is something that makes Rangers really, really good. Now, they're not as good in everything like a Bard is, but they usually will have some specific areas of focus that they will be good at, and their ability to make the entire party better, I think, just makes the Ranger a very solid skill class. Now, complexity. This is the final category, and this is a rating of how difficult it is to play the character, with a 1-star rating being very easy and a 5-star rating being very hard. And like the Paladin in our last one, I give them a 3 out of 5 in terms of complexity. They are relatively simple in terms of actual play because you don't have a huge amount of choices. You have your spell list and your attacks, but because they're a known caster, you really need to be judicious about your spell selection and picking depending on what spells you use will heavily impact how effective your Ranger is. So, thanks for watching. This has been our class overview on Ranger. What do you think? Have you played a Ranger? Is there anything that I missed or that you thought interesting? Please let me know in the comments. Our next class overview will be on Rogue. That should be a pretty fun one, and I will see you next time.